Welcome, everybody. Thank you for listening. You are listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. I am Josh. I am the worship pastor here at New Mercy Palisades Church. I'm going to start over there on the far side of the table.
This is the first time.
By Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
I'm joined by Pastor Kathy. Hello, Pastor Kathy.
Hello.
And a big welcome back to our very own Pastor Sam, all the way back from Korea, the motherland. Hello, Pastor Sam. Woo!
Woo!
And that's that, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I mean, it's good to see you, Pastor Sam.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
It is good. I mean, we were marveling at the vacation after, 3 weeks? 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Pastor Key, how do we get a vacation policy like this?
I don't know, man. He played the game brilliantly. That's all I got to say.
Okay. For context, second interview, I told Pastor Key, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I have a trip in October. So if this is an issue, do not hire me.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
We are, of course, kidding. But Pastor Sam, come on. You've been gone 2 weeks. You got to tell us about your travels. I mean, you were there for 2 whole weeks. You were traveling from you don't have Instagram, but I follow your wife, and she has Instagram, and she's she was posting some like awesome food, awesome pictures. So tell us about the trip. How was Korea?
Yeah, it's good. 3.5 out of 5 for the whole trip.
What?
I'd say. Solid 3.5.
3.5 out of 5?
Yeah.
Why isn't it more?
I feel like, okay, so the trip itself was very fun. I would say it was more of a family trip. So we went with Julie's parents, and every day, other than 2 days, we were with some family, I would say.
Right.
So we had 2 days by ourselves, which is fine. And we were just meeting, like cousins, uncles, aunts, and I would say that was good for 11 days. And then afterwards, I'll let you fill in the gap.
Sure.
But
11 days.
It's always like, it's one of those gains and losses, right? Like you want to be with family, and I'm just being real. It's like you love those times together, but when there's too much, you sort of hit that point where like, all right, let's go back home. Like, let's do this. Let's sleep in my own bed.
Yeah.
And things like that. But it was really good to be there. I haven't gone since I was either 6 or 8 or 9 or something like that. I barely remember.
Wow.
So it's as if I had never gone before. So because of that, I just didn't really know what to expect other than literally my images from like childhood or like honestly like K-dramas.
Yeah.
So I did not know what to expect. But it was fun. It just felt like another place at times. But I will say this, when we were going shopping, it was... I was telling Pastor Kathy this yesterday, and I was thinking about, I can incorporate this into a sermon, but I think it's too cheesy that I won't. But I'll say this. It's weird being in a place wearing clothes that were made for your body or for you. So for me, my issue with like dress shirts, jackets, and things like that is that the sleeves always go up too far. But when I was wearing, the same item from the Uniqlo in Korea, perfect length on the sleeves.
Really?
Something made for me, particularly for me. Anyway,
Yeah,
there's that. But
I get
You're
that
an Asian
feeling
man.
of DXL. Big and tall.
Oh, man.
Old Navy. That's awesome. Well, in thinking about your travels, I mean, again, it's good to have you back. And it's also like you must be so, you or maybe your wife, you must be so jet lagged. That jet lag coming back is no joke. Like, of course, jet lag either way is pretty bad, especially when it's like a 14-hour flight. But in my experience, that the one coming back, like, my wife and I went to Korea last year, right around a year ago, actually. And I remember it was brutal because we'd go to bed at like 9, 10 p.m. every night. And then we'd wake up at like 5:30 in the morning. and we would just be suffering for 14 hours straight.
Wow.
So how are you handling the jet lag of all things?
Yeah, I think last night was the. Excuse me. I'm having like a sinus thing as well. But last night was the first night I slept more than like 5 hours since coming back,
Okay.
and it was glorious. I slept from 8 p.m. until 9.
Wow.
It was amazing. Slept 13 hours straight.
Dang.
Well, I woke up a few times, but like I was basically in bed for 13
That
hours.
sounds beautiful.
But before that, yeah, it was, we were, I think after church and after the men's barbecue, I slept right when I got home at 5 p.m. I was supposed to meet my parents for dinner, but I just could not do it. Slept from 5 to 8, and then Julie woke me up, and I was so upset. It's like, why did you wake me up? I wanted to sleep. I think I could have slept from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Sure.
But yeah, we've been, slowly recovering. I woke up Julie today around noon too, because if I knew if I didn't, then she would be sleeping also until later on. But I think we'll in a day or two we'll be adjusted, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, in thinking about your travels and thinking about the fact that you've had to take a 14-hour flight there and back, and also like the ton of travel that you had to do in Korea, I was wondering, and this is a question for all of us, like what's one travel essential? Like you need this thing, otherwise travel just is not the same. Do you guys have that one thing, that one travel essential? Like aside from phone, aside from like I guess like laptop or obviously cash, so aside from those things, I'm talking about like travel accessories or things that like they're not just accessories to you, they're essential. If you don't have this one thing, it's hard to imagine like you can do a 14-hour flight or you can do travel in and all throughout Korea or wherever, even in the US, right? What's that one thing for you guys?
I feel like Kathy would have a fun one.
I don't have one.
Well,
So
hit me
many
with that
things.
list.
Well, I need to have earphones for sure. I gotta watch my movies.
Sure.
I need to have lots of socks in case they get wet. Lots of underwear. Lots of everything.
Why would your socks get wet?
You never know.
Never know.
You could walk
Yeah.
into a puddle
Okay.
and then you have wet socks.
Yeah.
Clearly, Attack of the Puddles.
Are you talking about just a travel flight or the whole trip?
Let's say you're going to a different country,
Uh-huh.
and it encompasses all of it. From the moment you leave the house to the moment you get back, there's
I
like
see.
one thing that you absolutely need. That's not the obvious stuff of like phone, wallet, keys, cash,
Okay.
things like that. Like what's one of those things for you?
I guess socks then, right?
Socks.
For you. I'm talking for her.
Right. Well, what about for you, Pastor Key?
A sci-fi book,
Really?
because I need to. That's how I feel like I'm off. I'm out of. I'm not at work. This is a vacation, right? That we're talking about, or
Whatever
whatever?
it is. Whatever it is. It's the
yeah.
travel.
Anytime I travel, I need a good book to be working through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
that's what it is for me.
All right. What about you, Sam? What was that one thing that got you through?
I would say eye drops and saline nasal spray.
Really?
Very important.
Oh,
Because the airplane is so dry,
Mm.
humidity levels are very low.
Yeah.
So you need some like lotion,
Mm.
but also eye drops, saline nasal spray.
people are so different in our
Everybody
world.
sounds so old.
So important. It's crazy.
I'm so curious what Josh's is.
Friends.
Oh, ooh.
That was so weird. His eyes were so like innocent and loving. Friends.
My thing is like either like a bag or a sling or like some kind of a situation that way, because when you travel, if you're going to like through the airport, if you're going from one place to another, like you'll often have like your phone, your wallet, your keys, and it's too much for your pockets. And then maybe you're buying something at the store along the way, and then you have a receipt, and then you gotta shove the receipt somewhere, and then you have like your hat or your headphones, or it's like it's just all too much for your own pockets.
Nice.
So I find like I have this little sling that I take with me when I travel. It's not really for every day. I've realized I'm not that guy, but when I travel, I definitely need a sling. I definitely need some kind of a thing where I could just put everything, especially security. Listen, airport security is such a hassle to have to take everything out. Like, thank the good Lord for TSA pre-check. Taking out your laptop, I don't know why, is such a bummer. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it.
I don't like to take off my shoes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you, TSA pre-check.
Are they sponsoring us?
No, we're sponsored by LaCroix, obviously.
How long does it take to get that pre?
It's kind of an involved
Right?
process. Yeah. So it takes like at least a month.
How much
2
does it
months.
cost?
70 for 4 years, 5
Yeah.
years.
That's it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so worth
You
it.
should get it.
The issue though is that they created the problem and then created a product and a solution for that problem. That's the issue. So it's
Yeah.
great, but they should just make it
Yeah.
easier for
Okay.
everyone.
Okay. I get it. I'm gonna get it.
And it's supposed to speed you through, right? Like it's supposed to speed you through. But the problem is in places like the Northeast where everyone gets TSA pre-check, sometimes TSA pre-check is longer than actual security.
Really?
Yeah. And it's kind of annoying. But it's great. But it's annoying. But it's great.
It's longer, but it'll go by faster because you're just walking through.
Sure. But also like once you finally get there, the idea of not having to take off your
Yeah.
shoes
Yeah.
or not having to take out like all of your electronics or whatever.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's the thing that you're really paying for.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I don't know where this opening segment is going. Whatever. Friends.
TSA pre-check. There we go.
Well, you know what I'll say? It's good to have everyone here at the table. I feel like it's been a while since all four of us got to kind of be like this. And so it's just good. It's good to have everyone. And especially for our conversation today, you know, Pastor Key, you gave this sermon this past Sunday. And I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of good thoughts. I think there was a moment in the message and like right after the message during response time, during like the prayer time afterwards, you know, so much of it. And I think a lot of it kind of was unlocked and we tapped into something. And a lot of it came from like what you did and sort of the bravery that you showed and the intimacy that you kind of put on display for us. But before we get there, you know, obviously we have to set the table a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we're in the middle of this series. We're in the middle of the Spirit Charged series. Charged being a double entendre. I won't get into all of it, but it's a double entendre supposed to kind of conjure up a lot of images for us. So Pastor Key, as we always do, could you set the table for us? Could you give us a little bit of context using your notes, Kathy's notes? By the way, you haven't seen notes, ladies and gentlemen. You have not seen notes until you've seen Pastor Kathy's notes. So using all of these notes that you have in front of you, could you set the scene? Could you kind of give us a little bit of the context of what the message was about this past Sunday?
Yeah, definitely using Kathy's notes. So, you know, we're looking at the church in the book of Acts, and the Holy Spirit is obviously moving very powerfully through that church. And we're looking at certain characteristics that we see in a spiritually active and robust church. And one of the characteristics that we covered this year this past Sunday was hearing God, right? It was very clear in the book of Acts that they were regularly hearing from God. And I just kind of built some scaffolding for laying some of the groundwork for hearing God, right? This conversational hearing from God. And the 4 points I listed were, according to Kathy, you know, just understanding that what happened to them can happen to us. Because we often read the Bible, you know, yeah, that's kind of a different time, this and that. But it happened in real life. And so to remember that, that's kind of a faith-building thing. Second point is to remember to understand that we have to be born again. And I went to unpacking what that means a little bit. And it's an interesting point because a lot of people misunderstand what it means to be born again. So I went into that. I talked about the third piece of the scaffolding, which is the Word of God, and how if you get the Word of God in you, and it kind of acts like soap through the fibers, and it enables you to hear God more clearly. And it's the best template for you in terms of, this is what God is like, what you see in the Bible. And then when you have that template in your brain and in your heart, when he does speak to you personally, you're able to recognize it more. The last one is, my last
I don't think I
point.
caught it.
Shame.
Well, there's another point. But
You have your manuscript in front of you.
yeah, it's a lot of
whole
pages,
thing.
though. And it requires, to hear God, you have to have a relationship with him. A lot of people use him as a vending machine. They're like, I don't hear God. Yeah, I don't hear God. I'm like, well, to hear God well, you need to be in a relationship with him. And I think there's a sub-point to that one where I talked about how when you're engaged, immersed in the activity with him for the kingdom, that's a place where you hear him often. And then last point was just trying to give people ways of what does, quote unquote, the voice of God or hearing God sound like the attributes of his voice. And that's about it. And then I had my wife share kind of a personal experience of hearing God from last week. That was it.
Yeah. Well, not to just breeze over that,
Yeah.
right? By the way, we haven't been able to have our weekly kind of like sermon recap and conversation because we haven't been able to sit down for our usual staff meeting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want to get there, but Kathy, for you, it looks like you took a lot of notes there. But I'm wondering for you, as you were listening to the message, also you were featured in the message.
That's right.
So I'm curious. I want to get some of your thoughts about kind of how you were taking in the message and how you were processing everything. And then for those that haven't heard the message, you should, by the way, but if you haven't heard it, Pastor Kathy was featured in the message through Rala's testimony. So I'm curious to know what that was like for you. I'm curious to know, as you were listening, because when did you actually listen to the message?
Monday.
Yes. Yeah.
Monday morning.
So as you were listening to it, and I'm not sure if you had any context or any echo of what might have been said. What were some thoughts that were going through your head?
I did not know that the random text I sent in the middle of the night last week would be relevant at all to the sermon on Sunday. But crazy things happen at Wednesday Wells every Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Tell you, come out.
Yeah, I was super humbled by the whole situation because clearly that was not something that I could have orchestrated on my own. And the fact that God decided to use me just so randomly in such a powerful way, I guess. It just made the sermon come more alive, I guess. I really appreciated all the points that he made. But yeah, towards the end when he was saying that when people are seeking God's kingdom and not just during crises, God is more often and clearly heard. That just humbled me again to think I should, really be seeking after what God wants more and more. And those instances like what happened last week might happen more often, and not just be like a one-off or something. Yeah, those were just some thoughts I had about the situation and the sermon put together, but yes.
Yeah. Speaking to that point then, because, how do I say this? And I want to say this well, and I want to kind of get the point across well. Pastor Key, it is evident that you put a lot of thought into every message that you preach, not just one or two, right? Every sermon, every series, everything that you do, it's just very clear and evident This one, though, I feel like for the first time in a long time, there was something kind of in it that wasn't in a lot of others. And I think where a lot of it came from was the kind of openness and willingness to have Rala
Yeah.
give a testimony in that way. You know, I'm not trying to dance around it, but I just like I want to get right to it. So if you don't know what we're talking about, it might be good for you to pause here, listen to that part of the message, and then come back. But for you, Pastor Key, what I'm curious to know is, you know, you're putting together a message like this, and like in the course of everyday life, you know, in your marriage, in your family, you're having conversations, and you and Rala are kind of talking through like what God is saying or what God is doing in your own life, right? And then, however the conversation happened, where you know Pastor Kathy is able to speak into Rala's life like that, right? And so, what's the thought there? What's the impetus like? How did you get to the place of saying like I want to feature this story? First of all, just featuring the story, like whoever it shares it, whether it's you or Rala.
Yep.
Like, how do you get to like that's something that you wanted to feature?
I mean, it was actually pretty simple for me. So I knew I was going to talk about hearing God, right? And you know, I had certain examples from my life, and like, oh, people have heard these already. And then like Thursday, we're just talking, and she's telling me this story. She's like, you know, Q1, I need to tell you a story. And she starts off, and like, this is going to be boring. I'm immediately checked out. And then she started telling me, I'm like, oh, this is actually really interesting, you know? And then when she told me the whole thing, I was like, holy crap, Kathy literally just heard God in the way that I've been teaching in this course and in the way that I want to talk about in the sermon. And so I asked her, can I tell the story? And she's like, yeah. I just get permission from Kathy and this and that. And a few minutes later, she says, maybe I should tell the story. I was like, yeah, I think that'd be better. And so it was her. She said she wanted to. It was her initiative.
Yeah.
I told her I thought I would tell it better.
Wow.
But I think she told it much better.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so too.
I agree.
Yes. Okay. So getting right to it then, you know, Rala gives a really powerful, what I'm just going to call, it's not a story, it's a testimony.
Yeah.
In my mind, that was a testimony of how God moved powerfully through Pastor Kathy, just being faithful to hearing what God is trying to say, and then being faithful to doing that which she feels like God is moving on her heart to do, right? Okay. It's a really powerful story, and, you know, I couldn't help but notice also it was apparent that like when you kind of came back to it, Pastor Key, you know, I've never seen you like that,
I know.
but you were pretty emotional,
Yeah.
you know, and there was some heavy stuff. Like there was some really heavy stuff in
Yeah.
that testimony and in that story, right? And I have to say, I really feel like the combination of the two really kind of unlocks something. Like, again, it's apparent that you put a lot of work in it, but it's more than just work. But there was something that was just unlocked and tapped. I wondered if you felt it that day as well.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on getting emotional. It was very cerebral, the rest of my sermon after that. But I don't know. It just was overwhelmed in the moment. And that's probably actually, it's good that she told the story, the more I think about it, because she seemed very controlled. You know, she was emotional too, but it seemed like she was more in control than I was. I think if I told her, I probably would have been in worse shape. But yeah, no, it wasn't planned. You know, it felt, I had a feeling that it was going to go over, like, have some sort of impact because it's so relatable. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, we just want to hear God, and we want to hear God in our most painful moments because that's where we want to see him, you know, and I had a feeling hopefully this will connect, and I felt like it did. But yeah, the part where I got emotional, I was like, that was not planned. And I try to stay in control, not because it's bad to show emotion, but, you know, in my training, they say sometimes when you show too much emotion and stuff like that, it makes the people feel uncomfortable. And just kind of like they need to care for you, that type of thing. You don't want to be in that position. But I've come to disagree with that over the years. Like, there are times it's okay because it models for them the reality of life a little bit, maybe. But yeah, just some thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, and I'm not exactly sure where I'm going here, but it was just, again, like, it was just towards the end of the response time, and like at the end of the service, there just was a palpable presence in the room, at least to me. Like, it was almost like very nearly tangible, like a presence in the room, that God was just kind of there. And as Christians, we believe that God is always with us. We believe that He is always, like, His omnipotent nature and presence is always there. But it was like His manifest presence. We've talked at length about His manifest presence and the difference between that and just Him being generally everywhere, right? But He just felt so manifest in the room that people were led to ask for prayer, or people were led to pray for each other, right? And
I did see that after service. People were in the room praying for each other, and some people were kind of in their own tears because of it released something in them.
Yeah.
So definitely, I saw what you're talking about.
Yeah. I was telling my wife at the end of everything. I was just kind of taking stock of everything. I was kind of like cleaning up my guitar and the wires and all that stuff and the rest of the production's equipment. And I just looked, and I just noticed that, like, God was there, and I had to, like, tuck myself away behind the curtain where no one else saw. And I was just like, Lord, thank you. Thank you that you're here. Thank you that you're at work. And thank you for the, like, bravery, the willingness of not only Pastor Key, but also Rala to tell the story, right? And so, but it kind of brings into light, and kind of like where I want to take this conversation is, it kind of brings into light, like, because the idea is this, that you try to convince people to kind of use your words and examples and relevant stories, and you try to do these things that you think and on paper, like, this is just quote unquote the formula, not formulaic, right? But you just know, like, this is how you craft a message and this is how you do it, right? And it's very reserved in the moment, and then all of a sudden you get to a place where emotions and things kind of overtake you because of how powerful these moments are. And I was curious to know, and I'd love to hear from everybody here about those moments of like how you guys dance and toe the line between doing that which is kind of like you do what you always do and it's more reserved, and you're kind of like following a pattern and following the way that God has called you to do ministry, but it's controlled in a manner, and like how do you toe the line between that and just raw emotionality? Because at some point in all of our lives, mine included, and plenty of people that are listening and watching, life happens, and things happen that can't always be packaged and contained in such a reserved way. But for those of us who are called to do ministry on top of that, right? It's like, how then do we toe the line and dance the line between those reserved ways and those raw and more emotional ways, right? Like, I'm not sure if the question is sort of getting across, but yeah, I don't know. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear, like, what has your training been like? What has your mentoring been like in that area? Is it something that you guys have thought about much previously?
I mean, I shared my piece. What they said
Yeah.
was standard practice. I don't know. It just basically, the practice is to try to bring more and more of your stories into it. And the question, I guess, for me is, how do I tell the story in a way where it's personally you can connect to it? And so there's ways of storytelling that can happen. But this other part, I just don't know what happened on Sunday. It's just so hard to manufacture. You can almost set kind of the pieces in place and then just hope maybe something will happen. But beyond that, otherwise it comes across contrived, this and that. So I don't know. That's just kind of my own experience. How about you guys?
Sam, why don't you
I can
kick us
say
off,
something. Yeah,
please?
sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I struggle with this just because I know emotions are like I'm not that type of person to say that you need to ignore your emotions, right? Especially in ministry or just in life. Right? They're quite obviously an indicator of how you're feeling. So paying attention to your emotions and what's coming up, it's important. I think I struggle with it in ministry and maybe specifically sermons, just because I think I said this in an earlier podcast, but I always try my best not to talk too much about myself. And I think that is specifically from my training, like what Pastor Josh was saying earlier, just because I think both personally, I grown up with some pastors that sometimes something that had always annoyed me was how they're talking maybe too much about themselves, and it made me sometimes uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I think because I had grown up in that sort of situation, and I had learned in some preaching classes to avoid certain personal stories, things like that. I think just naturally I just said, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to exegete the Bible very formally in the best way possible. But I don't think that always lands, unfortunately. Like I mentioned before, when Julie would listen to some of the sermons I'd given, she would always say to me, "Can you give more examples? Can you give more personal, excuse me, stories?" And I always didn't know how to respond to that. But I think what I had heard in Pastor Key's sermon, especially when reading scripture, is that one test is just if it's true to life, right? And I sort of thought about that and thought, oh yeah, these, when you're ministering and when you're creating a sermon, obviously you need to be biblically sound, scripturally sound, things like that. But a good test is if it's true to life, and that's sort of, I'm not sure if it's, I apologize if it's not completely answering your question, but I think that's something I personally struggle with. Just resisting the temptation to talk too much about myself, but the downside of that is it being too impersonal.
To the person that's uninitiated, what do you mean when you say if the story is true to life, then I'll tell it? What do you mean true to life? To your life or to the life of the message, or what does that mean?
Yeah, to just the life of the message. Yeah, if it's a story, if it's a personal story that can be used to deeply connect with other people, something that's relatable, then I think it's fine to use. But perhaps I just haven't discovered the right way to go about it.
Yeah. Pastor Kathy, what about for you? How do you toe that line between reserved and right and raw and emotional, or
Well, with the children, it tends not to get so raw.
Sure.
If you were to get so raw, I think there would be so much confusion in terms of examples, giving examples and messages. It's examples that they would understand and that fits in their context. So there's not a lot of room to get so emotional that I found. But I would say when it's not in a kid setting, when I've been in more intimate settings, small group kind of things, or giving a testimony, usually I, of course, will pray about what I'm supposed to share. But if I'm in that moment in a small group setting, I'm prompted with something, then I will pray to see if God will speak to me and reveal to me something that is relevant and helpful that would, that he would push out of my mouth. or if this is a time where someone else has something that must be shared for whatever reason, and for that person to listen to God and for me to listen well and for the person to have the confidence to share it. There have been times when I'm praying in that moment and I feel like God is telling me there's someone here. Just keep praying for the person because the person's too scared or something like that, or kind of resisting wanting to say something. Yeah. Sometimes if it's a matter of wanting to kind of allow other people to feel safe to share themselves, then sometimes I will start by sharing something. I probably will not get too emotional. Yeah, I think that might just be a personality thing and a time and place thing. But usually to get emotional, I have to be in like, sitting on the carpet in a circle kumbaya with like sweatpants and socks, Yeah, that'll do it. But yeah, if that's not the time or the place, I will just share up to a certain point and then see where the Spirit's going to lead the rest of the conversation with everyone else who's there. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I don't. Again, I thank you for your responses. For me, it's just interesting because I come from a more charismatic tradition and a charismatic background in history, and it's funny because no self-respecting pastor who operates in the charismatic tradition that I know is trying to manipulate your emotions and all that stuff for the purposes of a manufactured response. But there are times when the Spirit kind of overtakes you and it just hits you, or maybe it's not your spirit, maybe it's all of your emotion, and it just hits you in a moment and you can't help that it comes out when you are doing the work of ministry. Oftentimes that ministry work is either preaching, right? It's the preaching ministry, or for me, primarily in my role, it's the place of worship leading, right? I still, and I think I've said this story before, but I still have a thing in the back of my brain of somebody just going the worship, and I used to be the worship director somewhere else, and someone just going Pastor Josh is great, but the worship is just a little too long and emotional, right? And it's for me, I feel like the last however many years have been a dance between the two extremes. I just feel like the ball at the end of the pendulum that dances between reserved and collected and exegetical and 3 points and all this stuff on paper, manuscript, and then the other part of me that just throws it all out the window and says, you know what, I just feel like God is doing a totally different thing, and I need to follow this leading, and for me, where I struggle, well, not struggle, but it's often the dance that I need to do is to understand Lord, when I am preaching or when I am leading worship, how much of behind the veil, right, do I get to dip into, right? Is that even a helpful way to look at it? How much of the thing here is how collected do I need to be before I get up there, right? And I don't know, that's something that I feel it's just always there. It's just a slow sort of a steady burn, always there for me. And I wondered, I don't know if that's something that you guys kind of identify with or relate to, right?
Yeah, all of this was very helpful. I would like to speak to Sam's comments just a little bit. I think, so I got similar training at Princeton Seminary. I don't know if you're also thinking back to Wheaton days. Is that what you're thinking as well?
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's more I remember hearing that it's not about you. You don't want to make yourself the hero and this and that. You don't always tell about yourself. And there are pastors who do that. It's all about them and stuff. But I think there's ways to personalize the message without necessarily always talking about yourself. Though I do think there is a time and place for talking about yourself in a healthy way. But there's preachers out there who, like, I was just looking up, Fleming Rutledge, right? Her most of her sermon is fairly cerebral, but the theological precepts, the way she brings them to life, it doesn't always get like, she doesn't always use personal examples, but it becomes these daggers into the heart, right? And it does something, And so, I don't know, I feel like there's all these different tools, about getting into the heart. I think the personal testimonial story that really hits the heart is just one of those tools, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we're kind of using the word story and the word testimony almost interchangeably. And I wondered, I don't know, the question that is in my head right now is the idea of like, have we lost the power of the testimony for the sake of a relatable and true to life story that fits inside of the message that we're crafting? Like, how much better or worse off would we be if we just sort of kind of took our hands off the wheel for a second and just said, God, I need to share this thing.
Yeah.
Right. I need to share this thing. I don't know where it's going to land. I don't know who it's going to speak to, but I need to share this thing. Right. So like, I don't know. What is the difference, I guess, between a testimony and a story? Anyone? Bueller.
What was that last word you said?
Bueller.
I was like, did he just say Bueller?
Yes, I did. 80s babies? 90s babies?
Well, it makes me think of Paul. When you look in the book of Acts, there are periods where he shares his testimony of his road to Emmaus. Oh, not the Emmaus. Road to, what was it?
Damascus?
Damascus. That was the road, right?
Sure.
Okay. Anyway, my brain is still recovering. But yeah, he shares his testimony in certain spots. But other times it's not that. But the difference between story and testimony, I don't know. Testimony for me is just a sharing of something that God has done in your life. And through that sharing, other people experiencing it. Story could be any number of different things, but it can be a step removed from maybe that having that personal thing. I don't know, because there's a lot of stories that I share in my sermons, and when I think about it, it's pretty testimonial in nature. So I don't know, hard for me to delineate perfectly.
Yeah. Kathy, what about for you? Like, when you try to identify the difference between a story and a testimony, like, what are some ways that you differentiate between the two ideas?
I feel like story is more of like the umbrella word, like more general, and then maybe testimony is a specific type that is a little bit more intentional in purpose. Like, when you go on a website or go on Yelp, and technically those things are like testimonials of your experience, and there's a reason behind why the people are posting them, right? Either to convince you that this establishment is amazing, 5 stars, or that, they only filled your venti cup like this much and this much of it was empty, 1 star, but there was a reason behind telling that and sharing. Yeah, that's a little bit more of a sharing. But if I were to tell a story about a time that I had gone to this establishment, that doesn't necessarily have that same intention or purpose behind it. I might just be telling a story,
Sure.
I don't know. That's how I would kind of...
That's very helpful, actually.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Sam, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it just depends on how it's used, right? Like others have said, testimonies are just people's stories. They're used to show, usually, in sermons or whatnot. that'll be helpful to encourage others. That's just what I think about. I just kept thinking about what you had said earlier. Maybe we had lost the use or the art of testimony, and maybe how helpful and powerful they can be. So ever since you said that, that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Then unpack the thoughts, or unpack kind of like what's going on in your mind then.
Yeah, I think when people talk about their lives, one like source of authority, not the ultimate source, but one source is this experience, right? And you can test experience with like scripture, with friendships, with the church, things like that, so that there's some things that happen that you can say, oh, this was God, but you'll have to test that, with others in scripture. But yeah, I just think it's just so encouraging, right, to hear people's stories, to hear just how God is moving, or maybe to them how God isn't moving, so that others can help encourage or just be encouraged by them. Yeah.
So this makes me think of, the testimonies that are being shared every Sunday.
Yes.
The wonderful videos that you're editing.
Yes.
Yeah, those, I feel like it's one thing for one of us to go up there and be like, this is an awesome church. Like, Fall Festival is so great. And, one time at Fall Festival, this thing happened. And yeah, like all this stuff, right? It's very different to hear like Suyeon and Julian sit there and actually explain their experience firsthand and, share their heart and where they're coming from, having, all of those pieces like right from the source. And that kind of being a reflection of the kinds of people who are in our community, right? And that would, obviously show what this community is about and how great it is, right? Yeah, so I really appreciate that we're doing that. I love listening to those, and, not even just listening to the stories, you can kind of see the personalities coming through. You can I love the shots of them like serving, putting the cable on the ground and stuff. Because you can see a lot more about a person than just what they're sitting and saying. It's like the difference between, having like a short biography or like a resume of someone versus like seeing them in action. And yeah, I feel like testimony is kind of that, like actually getting the detailed, like firsthand take of someone rather than just like a random bio. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And, for me, this is not to disparage the art of storytelling and the art of crafting a story and using a well-crafted story in the pursuit of a timely word that you have, But one of the things that I kind of default to, or when I try to differentiate the difference between a story and a testimony, is something that I learned in Bible college, was the idea that a story, we all know what stories are, but a testimony is different, because in a testimony, the primary character is God, is God himself. And this is why, like, when I think back to the testimony that Rala gave in the message, to me, I was listening to that, and I want to say the entire time, I was like, God, you're so good.
Yeah.
You're so good for moving in this way. You're so good for revealing yourself to Kathy. You're so good for causing Kathy to be bold enough and brave enough to give this word to someone that she's still like learning who Rala is, and you're still kind of learning her story, but being faithful with the word. And it's like the entire time I'm just going, God, you're so good, because you're the one that did the work, and you're the one that revealed these things, and you're the one that gave the word, right? And so I think this is why, for me, again, not a knock on well-crafted stories, but the idea of like, I was also thinking after the message, Pastor Key, that Sunday, I was thinking about that passage in Revelation that says, "We'll overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony." Right? Like, there are times when people try to interpret that piece of scripture, and they'll talk about like the blood of the Lamb, what God does, and the word of our testimony, what people do, and it's like, to me, that's not really it. It is both of them, it's what God does. It's what God does in and of himself, the blood of the Lamb, Jesus getting up on that cross to die for the sins of all mankind, and the word of our testimony, going back to what God is doing, the primary character being God working through people, right?
Yeah, I think that should be the main definition for testimony, because you're right. It is testifying to something else, testifying to God. And that's what the Gospels are. They're testimonies, and if that's ultimately, that's so cool. I like that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Nice.
And this is a way, right? Because in these conversations, a lot of what we do is we try to reclaim or repurpose that which we learn out in the world and how we then kind of re-understand them in the light of the gospel, or in light of like what is happening like in the church, right? And Kathy, I love that you talked about like testimonials. My wife and I, like, before we go to a restaurant, we're big like reviews people, especially my wife. Like, we don't go to a new restaurant without like researching and looking up reviews and asking around if people have been there and what they thought, and getting, but the difference between, again, just to kind of drive the point home, the difference between a worldly testimonial and a testimony in the, for all of those other worldly testimonials, it's those people that are telling it. They're the characters, right? But in any testimony, in any truly God-given testimony, I feel like the primary character is always God. And you walk away from a testimony, a real, true testimony, and you're going like, wow, God is amazing, right? That's why you hear examples of like people that go to these conferences, or they'll go to retreats, or they'll go to these revival nights, and like, it's like, I wasn't expecting anything, and all of a sudden I got healed. Who did the healing there? God did. Or like, he opened up my eyes. Who's the one that did it? God's the one that did it, right? So I don't know. I just couldn't help but think of those things, and I just felt like in the truest form, this is probably why there was such a sweet presence in the room after the message, Pastor Key, right? Like,
God was...
Because God was already there.
Yep.
He was lifted up in that message and in that testimony.
I was really I was nervous to share it with Rala. I went home. I didn't say so. Husband Sam and I got in the car, and I didn't speak a word of it. I just turned on like Taylor Swift because we're getting ready to watch the movie, and I just sang her 10-minute song all the way home, and I just did not say anything. And then we get ready for bed. I'm in bed, and then he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Nothing." And I'm like texting, I'm like erasing, rewriting. I'm like, I don't know if I want to send this. We just met like a month ago. And then I was like, okay. If God was really doing something here, and he really wanted Rala to know this, because I'm 99.999% sure he really wanted her to know this, then I have to do this. Like, God is bigger than my my fears. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I like that you shared the color behind how that all happened.
Yeah. No, but I mean, Kathy, good on you, right? Like, good on you to hear and to move, right? To do something about that which you felt like God was doing in your life.
And what's so powerful about what you did is, in the moment, you're not sure if you're hearing God. And sometimes it takes a step like this, because you wouldn't have known in that moment if you heard God, unless you took a step like, you know what, maybe there's something that's worth sharing. And because it was confirmed, now I think you can go back in that experience and discern, hey, what was it about that it came across like the voice of God to me. And I think that experience is going to be tucked away in your life, and it'll be a good template building thing for you. So it's pretty cool. Yeah. But the main point being, hey, you feel like something, take a step. Maybe try to share it a little bit.
At Wednesday Well.
Telling you, man. Wednesday Well. People, I don't know.
It is also my firm belief that testimony begets testimony.
Yeah,
it's kind of like a multiplicative effect. Like, when God is really moving, it's that step of faith of sharing that which God is doing. And when you do, people just I don't know. It's like a match to like, or fuel to the fire, I should say. It just grows and grows and grows. So as you're listening to this, dear listener, if you're listening to this and you feel like you need a testimony, then either come to Wednesday Well, or come to Saturday morning, come to our services, or come to the pastors directly, right? Beyond that, like, there are so many other people in our community that want to walk with you and that want to really want to see what God is doing in your life as much as they want to see it in their own life. Because part of how we view family and part of how we do family here is like when a victory is won in our church, it's all of ours, right? And so like, if you're listening and you're waiting for that testimony, just believe that it's going to happen. But when it does happen, when God is moving, just remember to step out in faith, and maybe you'll encourage a lot of people, like Sunday, like Raula did, like Kathy, like you did, just taking that step out in faith. So thank you both for that. And also thank you, the three of us, or the four of us, the three of you, for joining me today for this podcast conversation. That'll do it for us here. It's a nice place to kind of put a pin on it. So we're just going to end it right here. We'll be back next week with another new episode of NMPC Plus. Until then, we do pray, dear listener, that you are blessed. And this is NMPC Plus signing off for now.